Finance Minister Inokodongwana is due to deliver what could be seen as South Africa's most important budget speech to date, and that's going to be on Wednesday in Parliament. The country has been dealing with rolling blackouts from a heavily indebted power utility. Kodongwana, for example, is expected to announce plans to help Eskom with its crippling debt. Then there's the country's overall debt burden that could be made worse by increased public service expenditure. Stellenbosch Business School's Professor Roux joins me now from that institution just to talk a little bit about his views ahead of Wednesday, ahead of the budget. Prof, good afternoon. Welcome to today, and thanks for joining us here on eNCA this afternoon. I've read some of the thoughts that you've expressed round about the budget, ahead of the budget, but I just wanted to begin at where the news is at today, and that's Eskom. We've just had a briefing about the state of the grid from Mr. Andre de Ruyter and some of his executive managers about where we are at with stage 6. But budget-wise, you say that there is bound to be a significant allocation of resources to the Eskom crisis when Minister Inokodongwana outlines the new budget. How so?
Well, first of all, I suppose it is a sign of the times that after the press briefing this afternoon announcing stage 6 will persist, they'll be actually happy and relieved. I suppose some was expecting something worse. But on a more serious note, obviously we know, and we took the cue recently from the state president's State of the Nation address, that electricity, or lack thereof, has become probably right now the single most important impediment to economic growth. Some estimates reckon up to 2 percentage points of growth is being shaved off as a result of load shedding. Close to 1 billion rand per day is being lost day in and day out. So it's one of those situations where without electricity and other forms of infrastructure, economies just come to a grinding halt. So irrespective of all the reasons for Eskom's current woes, and I'm not going to do all of that, I think it's one of those issues where the lights need to be kept on, and the finance minister will have to allocate some proportion of his very limited resources to that end.
Yeah, we understand.
I think...
Yeah, yes, carry on, Prof. You think?
No, you carry on, I'm fine.
Okay. I was saying one of the areas where we anticipate there could be more clarity, more explanation by the finance minister is how government in fact plans to take over more of Eskom's debt, which recently was sitting at 400 billion rand. If that happens, in your view, what could be the implications from the budget perspective?
Well, the problem is, of course, that as it is, the government's own debt is approaching 75% of the size of the economy. That in its own right is already having a major negative impact, not only today, but in the years and even decades that lie ahead. But it's one of those typical situations, more so than ever before. It's almost like a juggler juggling 10 swords in the air with only 2 hands, and all kinds of people shouting at this person to do this and not do that. I mean, it's just not possible. So if the government were to take on all of that Eskom debt, or a large proportion, then the already exceptionally high government debt will get even more problematic, putting a burden on and sort of preventing much needed spending on other forms of infrastructure, on education, on healthcare and the like. As it is, about 20 rand out of every 100 rands worth of tax that you and I pay in different forms is used to just pay interest on the already existing government debt.
Yeah,
but as I say, it's one of those things where there's no choice in the matter, really.
There's no choice in the matter. Will it worsen the country's sovereign debt standing?
I'm not sure about that. I think that, 400 billion rand is a lot of money, but the outstanding debt is already around about, 4.5 trillion. So 400 adds to that. But I don't think that in its own right will necessarily influence the sovereign debt ratings or the credit ratings. I think despite the so-called junk bond status, South Africa is often regarding the market as being a reliable debtor. We have never failed to repay our debt or the interest in our debt. We've never defaulted. And of course, the returns we offer on government bonds is very attractive. So I think that in its own right will not influence the ratings, but the influence or the decision about ratings as part of a much bigger picture. They would want to see some very real signs of a stabilization of the overall debt, for instance.
Yeah. Which of the hopes and expectations of the various sectors do you think are more likely to be met by the finance minister? In your article, you outline possible expectations from the corporate sector, small, medium-sized businesses, middle-income households, organized labor movements, and so on.
Yeah, those are not just expectations, perhaps more problematic, those are hopes. And the problem with any budget is that you get hopes, kind of desires, expectations, what you think might happen, and then ultimately reality. And there could be a gap between each one of those. So whatever the minister says in his budget speech in less than 48 hours' time, many people's hopes and expectations will be dashed. That's just inevitable. You can't be all things to all people. I suspect, however, and we've kind of alluded to this already, that there will be a particular focus on Eskom. I think any stakeholder, regardless of whether it be big business or small business or anybody else, does have a desperate desire to see electricity being sorted out in both the short term and the long term. Then secondly, I think that the majority of stakeholders, again, regardless of who they are, would like to see palpable evidence, plausible evidence of a plan to really stamp down on, whatever you want to call it, corruption, to ensure that our institutions are led with competence and integrity. That too, I think, is almost non-negotiable. The other ones are obvious, and there's so many of them. Anybody would like to see tax relief. Anybody would like to see no more VAT increases. No one would like to see an increase in the fuel levy. I'm afraid those are probably wish lists. The minister has to somehow square up the books, and in an environment which is hostile in terms of economic growth, in other words, where the tax base will probably not grow organically, I'm afraid there's no choice but to look for bits and pieces of increased tax revenue, at the same time, very importantly, to really if not slim down, but to decelerate the growth in government spending and, as a result, the government debt or the budget deficit. And that is the very inevitable balancing act that the minister has to play in a few hours' time.
Yeah. Now, Andre, in less than a minute, my last question, if you may answer it in less than a minute, social grants. That's going to be another big one because there's been increasing calls for a universal basic income grant, and people are saying the current amount of 350 rand in the social distress grant is too little.
Absolutely. It is too little. It is, I suppose, and please forgive me for saying this, I suppose one could argue it's better than nothing, and it probably has kept the wool from many people's doors. As you know, a big chunk of the social grant, which kicked in as a result of COVID, was meant to be temporary. But subsequent events, rising unemployment, leads us to the very strong possibility of the social grant system and some other guise being extended, if for no other reason than to help millions and millions of people who are living close to poverty to at least survive. So and also it's a political thing. Obviously, with so many grant beneficiaries, taking those grants away would, for any political party anywhere in the world, be political suicide.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Andre Roux. Prof, we'll have to leave it there. Some of your insights of what we should be expecting in the budget, but there's lots of hope as well that's riding on what Enoch Godongwana will announce on Wednesday in Parliament when he presents the budget speech.